Snow battered the quiet town of Ridgewood Falls as Ethan Cole pulled his coat tighter and kept his eyes on the road ahead. He had nothing left, no savings, no leverage, no clean path forward for his daughter. The repair shop had been slow for 3 straight months. The medical bills were stacking up on the kitchen counter like kindling. He was one bad week away from having to make a choice he wasn't ready to make. Then, a convoy of black luxury SUVs cut through the storm like they owned the road. They didn't slow for the ice. They didn't slow for anything. The lead door swung open. A woman stepped out in a charcoal coat, heels sinking slightly into the snow, like she hadn't even noticed the cold. Her eyes found Ethan's immediately. Sharp, controlled, already calculating. "Marry me," she said. Calm as a board meeting. Just on paper. To save my daughter. It sounded insane. Temporary, contained. But Ethan didn't yet know the one thing that would have stopped him from saying yes. This contract marriage would pull him into a world of power, buried secrets, and a truth so quiet it would take a blizzard to finally say it out loud. The snow had been falling since noon and showed no sign of stopping. Ethan Cole stood outside the garage he rented by the month, watching the road like he expected something to come down it, though he couldn't have said what. His daughter, Lily, was inside the waiting room, curled up on the worn vinyl bench with a paperback and a cough she couldn't quite shake. 8 years old and already used to waiting for him to finish things. The garage sign, Cole & Son, though there was no son, just a name he'd inherited from the man who taught him the trade, swayed in the wind. Ridgewood Falls was the kind of town that went quiet early in winter. By 4 in the afternoon, the main street looked abandoned, and the surrounding hills vanished into white. He'd been trying to work out the numbers again. The Delaney truck job hadn't paid what he quoted. The parts for the Kessler contract were back-ordered, and the envelope from the specialist's office was still sitting unopened on the passenger seat of his truck, which told him everything he needed to know about how he felt about opening it. Lily's cough had been going on for 6 weeks. The pediatrician had referred them to someone in Burlington who used words Ethan had to write down to look up later. None of the words were cheap. He heard the convoy before he saw it. 3 black SUVs moving in formation, headlights cutting through the snow like something from a different kind of story. They turned off the main road and into the gravel lot with the slow, deliberate precision of people who never questioned whether they had the right to be somewhere. The lead vehicle stopped. The door opened. She stepped out without hesitation. Charcoal wool coat, dark hair pulled back tight, and the particular kind of stillness that comes not from patience but from absolute control. She looked at the garage. She looked at him. She didn't introduce herself. "You're Ethan Cole." It wasn't a question. I'm Victoria Hale." A pause that felt intentional. "I need to speak with you about a proposal." He'd heard of Hale Group the way everyone in a 3-state radius had heard of Hale Group construction contracts, real estate holdings, a logistics arm that seemed to touch everything. Victoria Hale had taken the company over at 32 after her father's stroke and rebuilt it from the inside out. That was the version in the local business press. He didn't know the rest yet. She told him quickly, in the businesslike shorthand of someone unused to convincing people of things. She had a daughter, Sophie, 7 years old, who had been through a custody evaluation following the death of Sophie's father 2 years prior. There was a pending guardianship challenge from his family. The evaluator's report had flagged Sophie's social withdrawal and recommended a 2-parent family environment as a stabilizing factor. Victoria's legal team had determined that a documented marriage, even a temporary one, would significantly strengthen her position before the next review. "I'm looking for someone who can present credibly," she said. "Stable employment, good character, no complications. I'm a mechanic with a sick kid and a mortgage I'm behind on," Ethan said. "I know. I had you looked into before I drove out here." He looked at her. "You researched me." "I research everything. No apology in it. I'm prepared to offer financial support sufficient to cover Lily's medical costs, back mortgage payments, and a monthly stipend for the duration of the arrangement." 18 months, possibly less if the legal matter resolves early. You would move into the Hale residence with Lily. We maintain the appearance of a family for legal and public purposes. No interference in each other's private lives. No obligations beyond presence and discretion. The snow fell between them. Ethan turned and looked through the window. Lily had set down her book and was watching the SUVs with wide, curious eyes. She pressed her palm against the glass. "I need to think," he said. "I'll need an answer by morning," Victoria said. Then she got back in the car. He stood in the lot a long time after the convoy left. The wind picked up. The sign creaked. "This isn't about love," he told himself. "It's survival." He went inside and sat next to his daughter, and she leaned against him without being asked. And he stared at the wall and tried to figure out when exactly his life had arrived at this particular crossroads. The ceremony took 11 minutes. A justice of the peace named Harold Finch performed it in a municipal office that smelled of carpet cleaner and old paper. There were no flowers. There was no music. Victoria wore the same charcoal coat she'd worn at the garage. Ethan wore a clean button-down he'd pressed that morning for the first time in 2 years. They signed the paperwork. Harold shook their hands. Outside, a paralegal was already waiting with a folder of additional documents, the contract, which was longer and more detailed than the marriage certificate, and covered everything from household conduct to media protocols to the conditions under which either party could terminate the arrangement. Ethan read every page. Victoria watched him read with the expressionless patience of someone waiting for a printer. The key clauses were simple enough. No emotional entanglement. No discussion of the arrangement's nature outside the household. All major decisions affecting either child required mutual consent. Either party could exit with 30 days' notice after the 12-month mark. Financial obligations would be met monthly. On the first, via a trust set up through Victoria's attorney. He signed. She signed. The paralegal collected the copies and left. "My assistant will send the moving timeline," Victoria said. "The house staff will prepare rooms for you and Lily." "Staff," he said. "There are 4. You'll adjust." The Hale residence was on the eastern edge of Ridgewood Falls, set back from the road behind a long paved drive and mature trees. Ethan had driven past it before, without thinking much about who lived there. Up close, it was larger than he'd expected, 3 stories, pale stone facade, every window lit in the January dusk. It looked like a hotel that had decided to pretend to be a home. Lily held his hand going up the front steps. She was quiet in the way she got when she was working something out. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. Is she going to be our family now?" He squeezed her hand. "We're going to be staying here for a while. That's what we know right now." Sophie met them at the door, technically, in that she was standing in the hallway when the door opened. She was small for 7, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's, or so Ethan assumed, careful distance from everything. She looked at Lily. She looked at Ethan. She turned and walked away without speaking. Lily watched her go. She seemed shy. Give her time. Victoria was already moving toward her study. One of the staff, a quiet woman named Gretchen, who seemed to have been briefed on exactly how much warmth to project, showed Ethan and Lily to their rooms. They were nicer than anything Ethan had slept in. There were fresh towels folded in hospital corners and a bowl of fruit on the dresser that no one had asked for. He sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the house. The media attention had started the day after the wedding announcement went through the legal channels. Local first, then regional Victoria Hale, CEO of Hale Group, quietly weds local tradesman. The phrasing varied. None of it was wrong, exactly. The legal team had prepared a 2-line statement and released it without comment. Victoria had told him, "Don't engage, don't explain, don't confirm or deny anything beyond what the statement covers." He was a role. He understood that. He'd agreed to it. What he hadn't quite prepared himself for was how completely he would feel it. That first night, dinner was served at 7 in the formal dining room. Victoria sat at the head of the table. Ethan sat across from an empty chair. The girls sat on opposite sides and didn't speak. One of the staff served a meal that was well prepared and completely silent to eat. Victoria read something on her phone between bites. Sophie arranged her food methodically. Lily looked at Ethan twice with an expression he recognized as help. After dinner, Victoria excused herself immediately. Sophie disappeared upstairs. Lily helped Ethan carry the plates to the kitchen because she'd been raised to, and Gretchen looked quietly startled by this. "Dad," Lily had asked, "is she really our family now?" He washed the dishes himself because he didn't know what else to do with his hands. The first week had the texture of a language barrier. Ethan kept reaching for things that weren't there. The sound of quiet that meant Lily was asleep replaced here by a stillness that felt entirely different, watchful rather than restful. He woke up each morning, slightly disoriented, and took longer than he should have to remember where he was and why. The house had rules that no one stated directly. Breakfast was between 6:30 and 8. Staff handled cleaning. You did not move cleaning supplies. The back garden gate had a combination lock, and the code was written on a card in the kitchen drawer, but it felt somehow like the kind of thing you were supposed to already know. Meetings happened in Victoria's study with the door closed, and when the door was closed, you did not knock. Sophie remained sealed. She moved through the house like a small planet with its own gravity present, orbiting, never quite making contact. She ate her meals. She completed her homework at the dining table with a precision that seemed less like diligence and more like avoidance. She did not speak to Lily beyond the functional minimum. She did not speak to Ethan at all. Lily tried. She was constitutionally incapable of not trying. She put a drawing of a dog on Sophie's door. Sophie did not acknowledge it, but she also didn't remove it. Lily took this as progress. Ethan wasn't sure she was wrong. Victoria was present in the house the way a building is present, structurally significant, entirely impersonal. She left for the office at 7:15 each morning before the girls were fully awake. She returned at 7:30 each evening in time for the formal dinner that proceeded in the same studied silence as the first. She answered direct questions. She initiated nothing. Ethan had been in situations before where the air itself felt stretched thin the weeks after his wife Carolyn died. The months of probate and adjustment and learning how to be a singular parent, and this had a similar quality, except there was no grief here, just absence where warmth should have been. On Thursday of the first week, he made dinner himself. He didn't ask. He just arrived in the kitchen at 5:30, found Gretchen prepping the usual, and said, politely, that he'd take it from here tonight. Gretchen looked at him with an expression that mixed surprise with the faint alarm of someone whose professional territory had been gently breached. But she stepped back. He made what he knew how to make: chicken braised in cider, mashed potatoes with too much butter, green beans with garlic. Nothing complex. Nothing requiring equipment he had to ask about. The smell changed the house. Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway at 5 minutes to 6, drawn by something she probably couldn't name. She stood there, looking at the pan like she was solving a problem. "It's chicken," Ethan said. He didn't make a production of her being there. She said nothing. But she didn't leave. When dinner was served, something small but measurable shifted. The food wasn't the usual careful restaurant-quality meal that appeared from behind closed kitchen doors. It was rougher, more fragrant, unmistakably made by a person rather than a process. Lily ate enthusiastically and said so, loudly, in the way she said most things. Sophie took a second serving without being asked. Victoria looked at her daughter's plate. Then she looked at Ethan. It was the longest she'd looked directly at him since the wedding. Her expression didn't change, but something behind it did a slight recalibration, quick as a blink. She said nothing, but that evening, for the first time, she did not go directly to her study after dinner. She stood at the kitchen counter for 4 minutes, Ethan counted, not on purpose, drinking tea and looking out the dark window. Then she left. He cleaned up. Lily brushed her teeth. Sophie went upstairs. The house settled into its particular quiet, and Ethan thought, something moved, just slightly, in there. It started with a leaking pipe under the second-floor bathroom sink. Ethan heard it on a Saturday morning, the thin, steady drip that mechanics recognize the way doctors recognize a murmur. He found the source, assessed the joint, and went looking for the right wrench in the utility room. He found a toolkit that had apparently never been opened. Every tool still nested in its foam cutout, pristine and theoretical. He fixed the pipe in 20 minutes. He didn't tell anyone, but Gretchen mentioned it to Victoria later that day because of course she did, and that evening Victoria paused in the hallway and said, without ceremony, "You fixed the bathroom sink. The compression fitting was loose. It'll hold now." She looked at him for a moment as though she'd expected a different kind of person to be standing there. "Thank you." He nodded. She walked on. That was the first crack, not large, but structural. The second came on a Wednesday in late January when a storm knocked out the power at 9 in the evening. The house backup generator kicked in after 30 seconds but only powered the essential systems: the refrigerator, the security panel, a few outlets. The decorative lighting stayed dark. The heating dropped to its battery minimum. Ethan found candles in the kitchen pantry, lit several, and brought them to the living room. Then, because there was nothing else logical to do, and because Lily was already keyed up and Sophie had appeared silently in the doorway looking about 4 years younger than usual, he started a fire in the hearth. "You know how to do that?" Lily asked. "Every dad knows how to do that," he said, which was not technically true but landed correctly. Sophie moved into the room by increments, first the doorway, then the far edge of the carpet, then the low armchair closest to the fire. She sat with her knees drawn up and watched the flames without speaking. Ethan told a story. Not a particularly good one, something about a fisherman and a stubborn fish and a misunderstanding about directions. But he told it the way his own father had told him stories, which was slowly, with pauses in the right places, and without the particular nervous energy of someone performing for an audience. He just talked. Lily laughed twice. Once where it was supposed to be funny, once where it wasn't. Sophie didn't laugh. But she didn't move, either. She stayed in the chair with her knees pulled up and her eyes on the fire. And at some point during the story, she stopped looking quite so braced for something to go wrong. When both girls were asleep on the couch, Lily sprawled and unself-conscious. Sophie curled with rigid precision, hands tucked under her chin. Ethan added one more log to the fire and sat back. Victoria was in the room. He didn't know when she'd come in. She was standing just inside the doorway with a cup of tea going cold in her hand, watching her daughter sleep with an expression Ethan had not seen on her before, something unguarded and painful and entirely private. He said nothing. She said nothing. After a while, she crossed the room, took the armchair at the far end, and sat. She didn't speak. She watched Sophie breathe. The fire popped. The snow continued outside. Ethan looked at Victoria's face in the firelight and saw, just for a moment, the architecture of something underneath the control. A mother, exhausted and afraid, who had built an entire fortress to protect one small person and still wasn't sure it was enough. He looked away. It didn't feel like his thing to see, but he'd seen it, and something about that was harder to put down than he'd expected. February arrived quietly, and the household, almost without noticing, stopped being so careful. Lily discovered that Sophie owned 14 books about deep-sea creatures and considered this the most interesting thing that had ever happened to her. Sophie discovered that Lily, when asked directly, had opinions about everything and wasn't intimidated by silence. They began doing homework at the same table. They began having arguments, real ones, with stakes, about topics like whether octopuses were smarter than dolphins. Lily: yes. Sophie: that depends on how you define smart. And these arguments were, in their own way, the healthiest sounds the house had produced since Ethan arrived. The science fair was announced in mid-February. Both girls were entered independently. Lily wanted to do something about soil erosion. Sophie wanted to do something about bioluminescence. Ethan spent a Saturday afternoon helping them construct 2 projects simultaneously at the kitchen table, which required a level of logistical flexibility that would have impressed a moderately experienced event planner. He cut the poster boards. He helped source the sand for Lily's demonstration tray. He tracked down 2 small LEDs for Sophie's deep water model, which she had drawn out in precise detail in a notebook she'd clearly been working on for weeks. Sophie handed him the notebook without looking at him. "The circuit needs to work without the wire showing," she said. "Okay." He studied the diagram. "That's doable. I'll need about an hour." She watched him work for the full hour, occasionally pointing out a measurement he'd gotten slightly wrong, which he appreciated more than he let on because she was right every time. The night of the fair, Victoria arrived 20 minutes after it opened. She'd come directly from a meeting downtown, still in her work clothes, hair slightly less controlled than usual from the wind, moving through the crowded school gymnasium with the quiet intensity of someone who'd had to make an effort to be there and was aware it showed. She found Sophie's display first. Sophie was standing next to it, explaining the principles of bioluminescence to a teacher who was nodding with genuine interest. The LED circuit worked. The deep water model glowed in the way Sophie had diagrammed it in that notebook. Victoria stopped a few feet away and listened without interrupting. When the teacher moved on, Sophie looked at her mother. Something passed between them that Ethan, standing across the room, couldn't quite read, but it lasted longer than their usual exchanges. Later, walking to the car, Sophie walked between them. Not performing it, just walking between them because that was where she was. Then, at the car door, she looked up at Ethan and said, "Thanks, Dad." She caught herself immediately, blinked, recalculated, looked away. "Any time," he said. He didn't make it into a moment. He just meant it. In the car, Victoria sat in the front passenger seat and looked straight ahead at the road. She was quiet for the whole drive, but it was a different kind of quiet from the governance policy quiet of the first weeks. It had texture. It had something moving underneath it. They got home. He made hot chocolate because February was that kind of month. She stood at the counter while he made it and didn't leave the kitchen. "She called you that at school last week too," Victoria said finally. When she didn't think I'd hear, he handed her a mug. "Kids do that. She hasn't called anyone that in 2 years." He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. The hot chocolate steamed. Outside the window, snow was falling again, soft and unhurried, the kind of snow that settles into silence. She was looking at him. He was looking at the window. The moment stretched 3 seconds longer than either of them had planned, and they both felt it. And then she picked up her mug and left the kitchen, and neither of them said another word that night. The story broke on a Tuesday morning in early March. Ethan saw it first on his phone, still in bed at 6:15. The notification that had filtered through the news aggregator he used to track weather and local jobs. Hale Group CEO's marriage. A business strategy. He lay there for a moment, reading it with the still, careful attention he gave to things that were about to change everything. It wasn't one outlet. It was 4. Simultaneously, which told him this hadn't leaked, it had been placed. Someone had given the story, structured and documented, to 4 different publications at once. The pieces were detailed. They had the timeline of the custody evaluation. They had a description of the arrangement, accurate enough to have come from someone with access. They had photographs, the courthouse, the SUVs in his garage lot, Ethan and Victoria at the school science fair, standing too close in a way that now read entirely differently in the framing of the headline. The narrative was cleanly hostile. CEO orchestrates sham marriage to deceive family court. Hale Group stock at risk as board raises concerns about leadership judgment. By 8 o'clock, he knew the source was internal, someone on the board or close to it, someone who'd decided that Victoria's vulnerability was leverage. The Hale family attorney called the house at 8:45. Victoria was already on a second call. Ethan sat in the kitchen with Lily and listened to the house operate in emergency mode for the first time. It sounded like control evaporating very fast. The board meeting was called for noon. Victoria came downstairs at 10 in her best coat, hair sealed back, every expression banked. She passed through the kitchen without stopping. "Victoria," he said. She paused. "What do you need?" She looked at him. For a moment, something crossed her face, not gratitude exactly, but the recognition of having been seen, which was its own kind of thing. "To get through this meeting," she said. "That's all I need right now." She left. The meeting ran 4 hours. Ethan drove Lily to school, came home, made lunch, brought Sophie her after-school snack without being asked. The staff moved quietly. Nobody mentioned the news. At school, a classmate had said something to Lily about her parents not being real. Lily had told him about it in the car with the flat, factual tone she used when something hurt, but she decided not to perform it. He sat in the parking lot for a moment before driving, one hand on the wheel, working through a feeling he didn't have a clean word for. He felt like a liability. That was the word. Finally, Victoria came home at 7 with the answer he'd halfway expected. She sat across from him in the kitchen, hands flat on the table, and said it directly, the way she did everything. "The board is requiring me to publicly address the arrangement. My legal team believes the custody case will hold the evaluator's recommendation isn't automatically nullified, but the public narrative has to change." A pause. "The cleanest path forward for the company is to dissolve the arrangement formally and issue a corrective statement." He waited. "I think we should end this," she said. The words were even, measured, calibrated for minimal damage. He looked at her face and found nothing that disagreed with the words. Either she was very good at this, or there was nothing to find. "Okay," he said. He didn't make it a scene. He went upstairs and started packing. He was back in the rental house by 9 that evening. The rental house was smaller than he remembered, or possibly it was the same and the Hale residents had recalibrated his sense of space without his noticing. The kitchen light buzzed slightly. The second step on the stairs still creaked. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, except now it felt like a set built to describe a particular kind of loneliness. Lily didn't cry. She was 8 years old and had been through the particular crucible of losing her mother. So she understood something about rooms that are suddenly empty that most children her age didn't. She unpacked her bag methodically, put her books on the shelf, and came to sit next to him on the couch without being asked. "We'll be okay," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I'm going to miss Sophie." "I know." She leaned against him. Outside, the snow had come back, heavier now. March in Vermont had a particular cruelty to it. You'd almost convinced yourself of spring, and then winter reasserted itself with a kind of institutional patience. At the Hale residence, which he could only piece together later from what Sophie eventually told Lily and what Lily told him, things were quieter in a different way. Sophie ate half her dinner and left the rest. She didn't speak at the table. She went to bed before 8, which was 40 minutes early, and lay in the dark until her mother came to check on her at 9:30. She didn't say anything when Victoria came in. She just looked at the ceiling. Victoria sat on the edge of her bed for a while. Neither of them spoke. That was the image Ethan would come to have of those first 3 days of separation. 2 parallel silences. One house against another, each of them sitting in the particular quiet of a choice that hadn't quite stopped hurting yet. He tried to work. He opened the garage on Thursday, took in a sedan with a transmission problem, and spent 3 hours on it without thinking about anything except the transmission, which was the best he could do. On Friday, he found one of Sophie's library books in Lily's bag. She'd borrowed it and forgotten to return it, or hadn't wanted to. It was about bioluminescence. He held it for a moment, then set it on the counter. On Friday evening, sitting in the kitchen with the unread specialist envelope now finally open in front of him, He acknowledged something he'd been storing in the back of his mind with the particular efficiency of someone who'd learned not to feel too many things at once. He missed the house, not the size of it, not the staff or the prepared meals or the expensive quiet. He missed the kitchen at 6 in the morning when the light came in sideways across the tile and everything was still. He missed Sophie at the corner of his peripheral vision, drawing in her notebook, not asking for anything, just existing in proximity. He missed the way Victoria held her coffee mug with both hands when she was thinking, standing at the window looking at the garden like she was trying to solve it. He hadn't agreed to feel any of this. He'd been very clear with himself at the beginning about what this was. He closed the envelope. He put the specialist's recommendations in the folder where he kept important papers. Then he sat in the quiet and let himself feel it, because he was out of reasons not to. Victoria read the evaluator's supplemental report on a Saturday morning in the 4th week after Ethan left. She'd read it 3 times before, but this time she read it differently, not for the legal language, not for the strategic implications, but for what it actually said. The evaluator had noted, among other things, that during the observation period, Sophie had exhibited significantly increased social engagement, reduced signs of hypervigilance in domestic settings, and had demonstrated the evaluator's word, spontaneous affection toward both her mother and her new household members. Spontaneous, Victoria held on that word. Sophie had called Ethan Dad at the science fair, not for the evaluator, not for the camera of some legal performance, because it had come out of her before she could stop it. That was the thing about Sophie, she had her mother's instinct for control, the same fine-tuned mechanism for managing what she let people see. For Sophie to call someone Dad without calculating it first meant it had arrived somewhere below the mechanism. Below the defense, Victoria set the report down. She went to the kitchen and stood at the window with her coffee, and she let herself do something she almost never did. She thought about what she actually wanted, not what was best for the company, not what the board would support, or what the legal strategy required, or what the media narrative could absorb. What she, Victoria Hale, wanted for the life she was actually living. She wanted Lily doing homework at the kitchen table with Sophie. She wanted the kitchen smelling like someone had made dinner in it. She wanted Ethan Cole in the hallway when she came home, not because he'd been hired to be there, but because he'd stayed. This admission sat in her chest with the specific weight of things you've been avoiding for good reasons and then finally can't anymore. She called her attorney. "If I contested the board's position," she said, and reframed the narrative publicly, not as a sham marriage, but as a genuine relationship that started in unconventional circumstances. What are we looking at? A pause. Significant exposure. And the board won't like it. What about the custody case? A genuine, intact family unit is still the strongest position. If you could demonstrate, I'm working on it, she said, and ended the call. Ethan, for his part, was 45 minutes away at his kitchen table, being very carefully told by Lily that she thought he was sad. "I'm fine, Lil. You're doing the thing where you clean when you're sad," she said. "You cleaned the stovetop twice." He looked at the stovetop. He had, in fact, cleaned it twice. He sat down. "We were happy there," Lily said, in the voice of someone establishing a fact rather than an argument. "Weren't we?" He looked at his daughter, 8 years old, paperback on the table. Cough almost gone now because the specialist had figured out what they were dealing with and it was manageable. It had always been manageable, and he thought about what the truth actually was. "Yeah," he said. "We were." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her book. That was when his phone rang. Not Victoria. Sophie's school, unscheduled call, tone carefully neutral. "Can you come in?" He arrived to find that Sophie hadn't been at school since lunch. She'd told her teacher she was going to the bathroom, and she hadn't come back. He called the Hale house immediately. Victoria answered on the second ring. "Sophie's gone," he said. "She left school. I don't know where." A pause, half a breath long. "I'm on my way," she said. The storm came in fast. the way March storms did 40 minutes from light snow to reduced visibility, the temperature dropping through the afternoon while they searched. The school had contacted the police. The police were measured and procedural about it. A 7-year-old with a home address and no history of this, probably sheltering somewhere nearby, these situations typically resolved quickly. They were right in the statistical sense. None of that made the searching easier. Ethan worked the streets between the school and the Hale house on foot, which was where he thought she'd go. He knew how Sophie moved through the world, deliberate, purposeful, always toward something rather than away from it, even when the thing she was moving toward was her own idea of safety. He found her in 40 minutes. She was in the woodshed at the back of the Hale property, sitting on a stack of split logs with her knees drawn up and her coat pulled tight, holding a library book she'd borrowed from Lily against her chest like a very small shield. The shed was out of the wind but barely above freezing. She'd been there for at least an hour. He crouched down in front of her. He didn't say anything immediately. She looked at him. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. In the active sense, she'd been crying earlier and had stopped, and what was left was the particular stillness on the far side of it. "The book's about deep-sea fish," she said, voice small and hoarse. "Lily let me borrow it." "I know." He sat down on the logs next to her. He didn't crowd her. She was going to send it with me, but she forgot. Sophie looked at the cover. "She likes the anglerfish," she said. "I think the viperfish is more interesting." "Tell me why." "Because the anglerfish just waits. The viperfish moves." He sat with that for a moment. "That's a good reason." She leaned against him, then, not gradually, not cautiously, but with the sudden collapsed weight of a child who had been holding herself very still for a very long time, her head against his arm, knees still drawn up, hands still around the book. He put his arm around her. She didn't say, "I don't want to go back to how it was." She didn't say, "I want you to come home," or "I called you Dad because I meant it," or any of the things those were substitutes for. She just breathed. The shed door opened. Victoria stood in the doorway, snow on her coat, breathing from running across the property. She saw Sophie. A sound came out of her, not a word, just a sound, compressed and involuntary, the kind that only comes when something you've been terrified of losing is suddenly not lost. She crossed the shed and put her arms around Sophie, and Sophie let her, and for about 20 seconds, neither of them moved. Ethan started to stand to give them space, to step out, but Victoria's hand caught his sleeve. She didn't look at him. But she didn't let go, so he stayed. After a while, Sophie straightened up. She looked between them with the clear-eyed directness of a child who has decided that something needs to be said. "I want us to be a family," she said. "A real one. Not the kind that goes away." The shed was cold. Outside, the storm continued its work. Victoria looked at Ethan. He held her gaze and waited. She had the expression of someone who has been very precise about everything for a very long time and is about to say something that is the opposite of precise. He could see her working up to it. He didn't rush her. "Was any of it real to you?" he asked quietly. "Any of it." She took a breath. "All of it," she said. "I just didn't know what to do with that." He thought about the kitchen window, the fire, the science fair, the moment with the hot chocolate when they'd both felt the same thing and both looked away. He'd looked away because it wasn't his to want. That had been his mistake, believing that wanting something you hadn't been offered was some kind of overreach. "So do something with it now," he said. She did. It was just 3 words. "Come back home." He looked at Sophie, who was watching him with her father's or whoever's clear-eyed patience. He looked at the library book about deep-sea fish. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." They walked back to the house together through the storm. Sophie held both of their hands. The snow fell. The lights of the house were visible from the edge of the property. Every window lit. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday. Victoria went into it alone, which was her preference. She had prepared a statement, not the one her PR team had drafted, Not the one her attorney had suggested, but one she'd written herself at the kitchen table the night before while the house slept. She told them the truth. Not the legal strategy truth, not the managed narrative truth, the actual truth, that an arrangement made in calculated necessity had become something she hadn't planned and couldn't dismantle, and that her decision going forward would reflect that, and that the board could respond to it however they judged appropriate. 3 board members walked out. 2 asked questions that were legitimate and received direct answers. The remaining members, after a break and a closed-door conversation she was not present for, voted to maintain her position subject to a 6-month performance review. She came home that evening and told Ethan what had happened the way she told him most things now, directly, at the kitchen table, without theater. "The stock dipped 4 points, she said. "Is that bad? It'll recover." A pause. "It's been worse," he nodded. "Dinner's ready when you are." She looked at the kitchen at Lily and Sophie side by side at the table, arguing about something submarine-related with the focused energy of a long-running disagreement that had become its own form of friendship, at the steam coming off the pot, at the particular quality of light in the kitchen at this hour, and she held it for a moment the way you hold something you'd been afraid of losing. 5 minutes, she said, and went to change. The public correction came through a formal statement that acknowledged the arrangement's origins while declining to characterize the current relationship in contractual terms. The language was careful. The subtext was not. Enough people understood what it meant that the questions largely stopped, replaced by the mild, curious indifference that attends most stories once the drama has resolved. The custody evaluator submitted a supplemental observation report in April. She noted that Sophie's presentation had changed substantially since the last evaluation: increased engagement, improved sleep patterns per parental report, no further incidents of school refusal. She recommended that the current family configuration be maintained and that no further interventions were indicated at this time. The Hale family attorney filed the report. The matter was, quietly, closed. In May, Ethan moved most of his tools into the detached workshop behind the house. He'd begun taking small projects again, furniture commissions, custom cabinetry alongside the mechanic work, which he still ran from the garage in town 2 days a week. The work suited him. The balance suited him better than anything had in years. Sophie's bioluminescence project won 2nd place at the regional science fair. She was philosophical about not winning first. The 1st place project was about water filtration, she told Ethan on the drive home. "That sounds useful. Bioluminescence is also useful, just on a longer time horizon." He laughed. She looked satisfied. On a Friday evening in June, the 4 of them ate dinner on the back porch, because the light at that hour was worth the trouble. It was the kind of late spring evening that appears in New England, as if apologizing for winter warm, generous, the grass very green and the air very still. Lily and Sophie had gone inside to get dessert and were taking longer than necessary, which meant something was being negotiated in the kitchen. Victoria sat across from Ethan with a glass of wine, watching the last light on the garden. "I keep thinking about that first dinner," she said. "The formal dining room. The silence. I keep thinking about the hot chocolate," he said. She smiled, not the controlled, public-facing version. The other one, that he'd first seen by firelight and had been watching for ever since. "What about it?" "I looked away," he said. "I shouldn't have." She considered that. "We both did." "Yeah." The girls came back with ice cream, disagreeing about something with the happy, unguarded energy of people who've decided each other is permanent. They took their seats, and the argument continued, and the light continued fading, and nobody rushed anything. Later, when the girls were asleep and the house had found its particular quiet lived in now, full of the specific sound of a household that was actually working, Victoria came to stand next to him in the kitchen, not needing anything, just present. The snow was 6 months away. It would come back, because it always did. But that evening, the garden was dark and warm, and the window was open, and the house held all of them, and nobody was leaving. Outside, the last of the light disappeared over the hills. Inside, a family settled into the quiet it had built for itself, one small choice at a time. Some families aren't born. They are chosen in the coldest winters.